On a quiet morning at a meditation center in California, a renowned Zen master sat in silent meditation with his students. The atmosphere was still, broken only by the soft rustle of wind and the distant chime of wind bells. Among those who came that day were two very different individuals. One, a devout believer, the other, a lifelong atheist who had always opposed religion. Yet both carried the same question they had held for years: is there a God? The first to approach the master was Daniel, a 42-year-old man working for a Christian charity. He had spent most of his life serving the community, building small churches in rural areas, teaching orphans how to pray, and holding a deep faith in God's love and mercy. He was raised in the church, studied the Bible from a young age, and had never questioned his belief until recently. Age and the bitter experiences of charity work had begun to erode the once unshakable faith Daniel held. He had prayed for terminally ill children, many of whom did not survive. He had put his hope in God to save a crumbling marriage, yet his wife still left. Cracks in his faith began to form. Though he continued his work, inside him was a void, a terrifying silence from him. That was why he came to the meditation center. Not to abandon his religion, but to seek an honest, unfiltered answer from someone he'd heard was awake beyond all systems of belief. Daniel waited until the morning session ended. As others relaxed under the gentle sunlight, he quietly stepped toward the master. His voice was low, urgent. "Master, I just want to know one thing: is God real? I can't live another day in this doubt." The master looked at him for a long moment. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. He knew this type of person well, a heart once burning with faith, now reduced to ashes and a single ember still clinging to life's meaning. After a few seconds of silence, the master said softly, but with unwavering clarity, "No. There is no God." Daniel stood still. No anger. No tears. Just a quiet emptiness. He bowed in gratitude and walked away. The students nearby, most of them secular or atheist, began to murmur. Some smiled subtly with relief. The news spread quickly throughout the center. The master has confirmed there is no God. For many, it was a moment of liberation. They felt freed from invisible fears, from concepts of sin, judgment, or the afterlife. A few even celebrated quietly, as if they had finally laid down a lifelong spiritual burden. But that wasn't the end of the story. The afternoon at the meditation center passed in a calm yet stirred atmosphere. The news of the master's response had spread like a wave of warm wind. He said there is no God. For many, especially students who had long struggled with religion and the burden of guilt, it was a liberating turning point. It felt like confirmation of what they had long suspected, that there was no invisible hand judging or controlling their lives. But as the day wore on and the sun cast long shadows across the Zen garden, the second person approached. Her name was Julia. She was 35, a data scientist at a major tech company in Seattle. Since her college days studying computer science, she had been known as a deep skeptic of all forms of religion. Julia was the type who demanded evidence, data, logic, and she had spent years blogging, podcasting, and debating in person to convince others that religion was a product of fear and ignorance. What she hadn't shared, not even with her most loyal followers, was the quiet unease that crept in at night. When silence filled her sleek, modern apartment, a question would echo, "What if I'm wrong?" She didn't believe in God in the traditional sense, but there were moments, staring at the sky or witnessing the birth of a child, when she couldn't deny the strange feeling that something greater might exist. That feeling had brought her here. Not to find God, but to face the possibility that she had missed something. As the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, Julia approached the master. He was sitting beside a small lotus pond, eyes half closed as if listening to the breath of the earth itself. Julia sat down across from him and asked, her voice soft but sharp as a well-used blade, "I heard you said this morning that there is no God. So please, tell me the truth, is there a God or not?" The master slowly opened his eyes, his gaze calm and steady. He looked deep into Julia, into the mind trained to analyze everything, into the heart that had learned to suppress all doubt, and said, firmly but gently as a breeze, "Yes, there is a God." Julia furrowed her brow. She thought she might laugh or argue, but instead, she fell silent. For a moment, she felt no imposition, no belief system, only an unconditional affirmation, given just to her. Meanwhile, the surrounding students stirred again. News spread quickly, just as it had that morning. But this time, the center fell into confusion. This morning he said there's no God. Now he says there is. What kind of game is he playing? Once again, bewilderment swept through the center like a thick fog. No one knew what was true anymore, what to believe. But the Zen master remained still, offering no explanation, no defense. He seemed to be waiting to teach them the most important thing they had yet to see. The entire meditation center sank into a quiet kind of chaos after that evening. Word spread so quickly that, within hours, the students had divided into two camps. One insisted the master had said there is no God. I heard it with my own ears when he spoke to Daniel. While the other argued just as firmly, he told Julia there is a God. So what's the truth? Many felt betrayed. They had come seeking clarity, but now, the words of someone said to be enlightened had left them more confused than ever. In the hallways, the tea room, and along the walking paths, endless debates broke out. Some tried to explain, maybe the master was speaking symbolically. Others were furious, it's either yes or no. It can't be both. Daniel, the one who had been told there is no God, withdrew to his room, feeling cast out of a grand design he thought he once understood. Julia, on the other hand, wandered the quiet garden paths, sensing she had been acknowledged, yet now overwhelmed by a new storm of questions. She began to doubt the very intellect and rationality she had always trusted. The next morning, when the meditation bell rang, the students gathered in the main hall. Every face bore some trace of curiosity, disappointment, or defiance. As the master entered, a young student, perhaps no longer able to tolerate the contradiction, stood up and spoke loudly. "Master, last night you said there is a God. But yesterday morning you said there isn't. We came here to find truth, not to be more confused. Please explain. Which answer is correct?" The master sat down calmly, his eyes resting not just on the speaker, but on every soul in the room. He spoke, gently but with unmistakable weight. "When Daniel came to me, his heart full of broken faith, he needed to be freed from the burden of a God he believed had abandoned him. When Julia came to me, her mind full of logic and doubt, she needed to be reminded that not all of life can be measured with data." He paused, then continued. "The question, is there a God, is a box, and both answers, yes and no, are just two sides of the same trap. If you believe there is, you live a certain way. If you believe there isn't, you live another. But neither answer changes the quality of your being, unless you truly understand yourself." Silence filled the room. It wasn't what people wanted to hear, but perhaps it was what they needed. Truth doesn't lie in yes or no. It lives in how you walk each day, with awareness, honesty, and compassion. That is what truly sets you free. Then he closed his eyes again, leaving the hall still full of people. But this time, in a deeper silence. After that morning's teaching, something strange happened. No one said a word. It was as if the entire room had just weathered a storm, not one of noise, but of a silence so dense, so deep, it pressed gently on every soul present. Each person sat with their own feeling, but all shared something in common. Something inside them had cracked open and begun to unfold. Daniel, who had once placed absolute faith in God, felt a quiet light begin to fill his chest. He no longer felt betrayed by God, nor offended by the Master's answer. Instead, he began to realize, for so many years, he had placed the survival of his soul in the hands of a belief about something outside of himself, rather than listening to the life that was unfolding within him every day, in his love, in his compassion, in the courage he had shown while serving those in need. For Julia, who had always seen religion as illusion, the teaching also opened a new window. She began to recognize the rigidity in her own logic, that she had rejected anything unprovable, as though life were merely an equation. But the Master had not asked her to believe in God. He had challenged her to ask again, what is real, if it doesn't lie in the words yes or no? The silence after that talk lasted into the afternoon. There were no more debates. No conclusions drawn. Instead, people began walking more slowly through the gardens, sitting longer on the wooden benches, and looking at one another with softer eyes. One student, who had fiercely argued the day before, now smiled gently and said, "Maybe finding the answer matters less than living with the question sincerely." The master spoke no more that day. He wandered slowly around the lotus pond, stooped to pick up a fallen leaf, and paused to watch the sky turn its hues at sunset. No more words were given, but somehow, everyone was still learning. Later, many students left the center no longer burdened by the original question. Some still believed in God. Some still didn't. But both carried something new. They began to live more slowly, more mindfully, and more honestly with themselves. The question of God's existence didn't disappear. But it was no longer a weapon for defining right or wrong, or for judging each other. It became part of the journey, not the destination. And in that very uncertainty, a quiet kind of peace began to take root. A few weeks later, the meditation center returned to its usual quiet rhythm. But one thing was clear: it was no longer the same place. The students who had once debated the existence or non-existence of God now sat in meditation together under the trees, shared hot tea in the mornings, and told each other stories of mindful moments in their daily lives. No one asked the master that question again, not because they had found a clear answer, but because they had stopped seeking it in the same old way. Julia decided to extend her stay for another month. Each morning she woke early, meditated by the lake, and practiced watching her thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. She no longer needed to prove anything, she was learning to listen. Once, during a quiet conversation with Daniel, she said, "I don't know if God exists, and maybe I never will. But one thing I'm sure of, I feel more alive than ever when I stop trying to prove something, and just be fully present." Daniel nodded, a gentle smile on his face. He had changed, too. From someone who once placed absolute faith in an image of God out there, he had shifted toward practicing that faith through small, quiet actions, steady, like planting seeds without needing to see the harvest. He started helping in the kitchen, supporting new arrivals, and smiling more often. "Maybe God doesn't live at the end of an answer," he once said, "but in the way we ask the question and live it sincerely." The master never spoke about the topic again. When someone asked why he had given two opposite answers, he simply smiled and said, "The truth isn't in the answer, but in the awareness one can touch when they hear it." The story of that morning and evening slowly became a kind of legend within the meditation community. Everyone told it differently, some focused on the God exists part, others on God doesn't. But what was remarkable was this: no one argued about it anymore. they no longer felt the need. Because in the end, what the Master had offered wasn't a philosophical truth, but an inner shift from believing or not believing to living truthfully with oneself, with others, and with each moment. In a modern world where people are swept up in labels, opinions, and the need to assert the self, perhaps that, the humility to say, "I don't know, but I'm listening," is the new path to freedom. And so, the story doesn't end with an answer. It ends with an open door. A door that leads inward, to a place where you don't need the right answer. You just need to be fully alive.